All right, hello everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are just about to get started in a few seconds. We have launched the Zoom poll. I am recognizing that we had to keep the categories limited. I know there's a lot of different roles that I'm seeing up here, which is really exciting. People from all over the place. So please feel free to also introduce yourself in the chat box, and we'll keep that going as the presentation goes. If we want to get started. All right, if we can get the slides started, we'll get going here. All right, fantastic, thank you. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Regional Education Laboratory Midwest, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on research-based resources, considerations, and strategies for remote learning. We're so glad that you could make the time to join us for the second in a series of webinars from the Regional Education Laboratories. Before we begin, we want to do some quick housekeeping. So as far as the Zoom platform goes, make sure that you're joined with the audio. You can join audio by clicking the Join Audio button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Click on the chat box to introduce yourself, ask questions for the presenters, make comments, or let us know about any technical issues. You do have the option to either send a comment to the presenters or to all attendees. Live closed captioning will be available during this webinar. To see the captions, click on the closed caption button at the bottom. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording and all event materials will be archived on the REL Midwest website. We will also send an email with a link to the video as soon as it's available. So if you're just joining us, please make sure that you're taking the Zoom poll and introducing yourself into the chat box. And on the next slide, we've sent you 3 resources. The first resource is a resource roundup with links from all of the slides in this presentation, plus additional resources from our presenters. The second is a note-taking sheet, which you see in the middle of your screen to help you structure and record your thoughts. And then the third is a resource flyer, Transitioning to Remote Learning, which summarizes the main takeaway from our presenters. So please feel free to share these with your colleagues and use them throughout the presentation as we go. And just as a side note, if you didn't receive those, please email Laura Chekovich or chat her in the box. So I am Dominique Bradley. I'm a researcher from Regional Education Lab Midwest and American Institutes for Research. I'm coming to you from Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. I saw in the chat box there's a few of us Wisconsinites in there, so hello. I want to introduce my colleagues from REL Midwest and American Institutes for Research. First, if I can have my colleagues join me on screen. I'd like to introduce Fausto Lopez. Fausto is a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant for REL Midwest and American Institutes for Research. Melissa Rasberry is a Principal Technical Assistance Consultant for American Institutes for Research. And Marshal Conley is a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant from REL Midwest and American Institutes for Research. Thank you, guys. And next, I'd love to have our practitioners join me on the screen. All right. Excellent. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jody Nelson. She is the Executive Director of Change Inc. and the Guadalupe Alternative Program in St. Paul, Minnesota. Change Inc. is a community-based nonprofit and an accredited state-approved alternative school and contracted site at the St. Paul Public Schools. Guadalupe serves as opportunity youth ages 15 through 24, many of whom are immigrants or refugees, and nearly all of them are challenged by poverty. Kate Quicksell, has served as the Healthcare Pathways Coordinator for Guadalupe and Change Inc. for the past 3 years. Kate is a former healthcare provider and works to establish strong community employment partnerships, develop robust workplace readiness skills, and ensure that all students reach an industry-recognized certificate in the health field before program completion. And finally, we have Nancy McGowan. Nancy is an instructional coach at Shades Elementary in Hoover, Alabama. Nancy is a national board certified teacher and a 31-year veteran of teaching with a certification in gifted instruction. Nancy also serves as the community ambassador for AIR's Computer Science for All Teachers virtual community of practice. All right, we'd love to find out who all is in the room, so we're going to take a look at our poll. At least I am not seeing the poll. If somebody is seeing the poll, if you can let me know.
Yeah, it should be viewing now, but it might be a little delayed.
Okay, it looks like, okay, excellent. Now I can see the poll. All right, looks like we have a range of administrators and instructional staff and agency staff, 24%, researchers, coaches, excellent. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Really excited to have you here and offer you some, at least what we think are great resources. Right, thank you. So our agenda for this hour is to provide you with a brief overview of REL Midwest and what we offer. And then we're going to dive into our topics of supporting social and emotional learning, considerations for districts, resources to support remote learning, and then tools to enhance virtual learning. REL Midwest is part of a network of 10 regional education laboratories funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. REL Midwest serves 7 Midwest states: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Next slide, please. REL Midwest conducts numerous projects in collaboration with our education partners in the region. We develop research studies, offer technical support and coaching projects, and events like these that connect research to practice. So we want to take a moment to recognize that we are in an unprecedented time, both as a nation and as an educational community, trying to ensure that all youth continue to have a high quality education. Given that, we've had an overwhelming need for additional resources in these challenging times. The 10 RELs from across the country have convened a working group to develop additional events and resources, and I want to call your attention to 2 upcoming events. First, REL Mid Atlantic is hosting a webinar on April 14th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. There will be a link in the chat box for you to register for that. This webinar will focus on specific evidence-based strategies for remote learning, policy decision-making frameworks, and strategies to address inequities in remote learning, which I know is a topic at the top of everybody's mind. REL Central will shortly after host a quick chat on April 16th from 11:30 to noon on Mountain Time, and that will focus on supporting remote learning across the continuum of internet access. To stay up to date on these resources and more, please sign up for the REL newsletter and follow us on Twitter. There will be links in the chat box so that you can do both of those things. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and all participants will receive a link to the recording and slide deck as soon as it's available. Okay, and with that, I will pass it to my colleague, Fausto Lopez. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dominique. Well, welcome everybody as we really, wrap our brain around and tackle a very salient issue as we really look to continue our work in this era of COVID-19 to still really put front and center the support for our young people in their social and emotional learning, which is the process of supporting their social and emotional development. And so, we really want to take a time here to really ground ourselves in the fact that there has been a shift and there's a lot going on. And we are exploring and really building on work that research has been synthesizing and pushing out and building capacity when we were in front of each other. And this idea that when we are together, how we create guidance so that we can engage our young people and the adults who are implementing programs or supporting young people across their development, to make sure that we're engaging our young people in exploring their emotions, in building positive relationships with their peers and adults, and really coining more and more the phrase of using or engaging developmental relationships, and we'll explore that. And how we, in general, get together both at the adult level to support each other, to make sure that we are supporting young people in the most appropriate and responsive way related to our work. And really trying to pay attention to the learning conditions that impact instruction. Now, this was something that we were wrapping our brains around together collaboratively through behavioral health teams, through different routines that were happening at the school to affect climate, to impact the lives of our young people and make the shift that we knew needed to happen at the cultural level of our school building or the learning environment. But now we know that the learning environment has shifted. That's why we're all here today. So the idea here is we wanted to kind of bring front and center this idea that we don't want to lose the elements that we know we were focusing so intently on when we were together in the classroom or in the school building, to make sure that we leverage the psychology of the situation here. To make sure that once we get over some of the shifts and some of the sediment settles, that we get back to trying to create routines that can support our young people to reduce some stress. And again, this is going to be a different look depending on where we are and the young people we are supporting. But the idea here is at some point we want to get back to some of the normalcy, as we kind of talk about, that we know used to happen, that will support positive learning conditions. And now we know that those learning conditions or the learning setting has changed, so we have to even be more explicit than we were before about the sequence and the flow of the content. We have to be extremely intentional about the work that we're trying to think through as we push our young people to come out and gather through and work through this. And just similar to when we used to be in the classroom, we have to really put together this idea of being developmentally appropriate in our approach of this work, because we know we do not want to oversaturate our learners at this moment, as they are also adjusting and their psychology is looking to process these different concepts, including academic, including all the different shifts to not being able to go to school and what is happening in the exterior world. So we have to really push ourselves to check the amount of dosage that we're proposing in our instruction, and also the amount of processing and time that we need. And this can even go back to some of those CASEL 3 signature practices about how we make sure that we build routines, rituals, that get that engaging content and differentiate it through groups, and get ourselves into a place of reflection at the end to make sure that this learning is seeping in. And then what are we engaging them in during this instruction is also really important. It's also to contextualize and engage educators to find out what do they need at this time on top of the academic, even technological needs that might be arising at the moment, but really trying to assess what are the other additional tools, resources, and supports that they'll need, specifically as we engage young people in deeper understanding of what's going on with this current COVID-19 situation, specific to the health implications, but also a lot, again, to the social implications of this. You know, we know that our young people have hit pause on their work, hit pause on their social lives, hit pause on proms and all of the other teams that they used to participate that supported this development. So one of the resources that we really wanted to push out today that is really coming out is to really how do we get into and continue to leverage connections and relationships in this virtual world. And the Search Institute is still building off of their developmental relationship framework in this time of COVID, and really leveraging the fact that we can take this time in the virtual environment to continue to get into relationships and connections with our young people, with our colleagues that push us to express care, to challenge growth, to provide support, whatever that support might look like, to get into a position of sharing power and collaborating so that we can expand the possibilities and keep pushing ourselves, again, to keep pushing the churn of the psychological piece here that we really need to do. And so you'll have a link here, and it is in your resource pack, this idea of being able to find this checklist that I think is very practical for any educator. And they are also hosting a webinar in the next few days. So what are some resources that we want to push out around the ecology of parents and families? Again, it's always been a critical part of learning and education and outcomes to make sure that we can get into the space of the family or caregiver ecology. And we know that our young people were experiencing those type of supports in so many different ways when they were coming to school. And so in this current virtual environment, we want to give you guys some very practical resources that will help meet the immediate needs. The most, again, we need to make sure, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, to make sure that we really are addressing what our families and what our young people need even before we're engaging them in any type of instruction, and making sure that they feel safe and cared for. So you have all those resources also in your packet. Now, for us educators, we want to really broaden now, and we were always trying to broaden educator, because we know that learning and the science of learning and development was pushing us to understand that it takes a village to affect this type of social and emotional learning, the development, the positive outcomes that we're pushing. And the idea here is really, you still want to make sure that all educators have an opportunity to think through these constructs. And that's across all roles, because we know that teachers at the moment are engaged. They're engaging in their shift towards e-learning, remote learning, and different ways of supporting the learner. But we also know that in this time we were together, we were focusing on all of the ecology of those who are affecting young people. And this is a critical time to really engage all those resources and really make sure that we think about well-rounded educational experiences. We get those really great insights from our colleagues in the field, and then still really put some intentional planning work into how we establish those learning conditions and provide those ongoing social and emotional support. Now, we also have to talk about the fact that we are all, as educators within our practice, making a big shift. So this idea of getting into personalized learning, both for educators or the adult learner in this scenario, is really making sure that we also put into play some of the existing research that we've always had, that we were leveraging when we were together and in person, to making sure that we can support each other in our well-being and the processing of our own adult SEL, or our own emotional intelligence about how we are adjusting, coping with these shifts and the different stresses that have been put on us, both internally to our learning, to our job, but also obviously to the external environment. So a couple of them that we want to highlight that are really taking off and are really great in this virtual space are identifying reflective learning partners, or peer-to-peer mentoring in a way, getting together with colleagues and really talking through the different shifts and the different constructs that are happening, specifically technological, specifically around curriculum and project design, and then really getting into co-developing learning plans and mimicking some of the structures that we did when we were together in the school building, and we were meeting for grade level meetings, and we were getting together for behavioral health group constructs, and thinking through making sure that we were culturally responsive. This is the time to really put those things into play and plan and try to still mimic some of that normalcy. And then obviously getting into some of these communities of practices, really thinking through the existing systems of multi-tier systems of support that were existing, those community advisory boards that at the moment might be wanting to help and don't know how to help. So we want to really make sure that we activate all of our assets that we have available to us.
All right, thank you so much for that, Fausto. And just to reinforce, all of the links from Fausto's presentation just now, you can find in the link roundup. And if I can ask our educators to come back on screen, actually Kate and Nancy, I'd like to find out from you all. And actually, Kate, can we start with you? Can you tell us what you've done in terms of supporting student social and emotional learning? And in particular, what were some challenges? How did you address them? And what kind of strategies did you find most useful?
Sure. So I'll move pretty quickly through the challenges, because I think most of us are facing the same ones, and we want to get kind of right into strategies. The main challenges for my classroom are probably pretty similar to most people here right now. We have students who are low income, who are new to the country, some who are parents themselves. Many are working part-time or full-time, and some have lost jobs or had a family member lose a job in the recent weeks. Some students are living in chaotic situations, maybe being without reliable internet or a quiet place to study. They're typically relying on school for food, social services, emotional support, and peer-to-peer relationships. That feeds into the challenges that we face as educators. The big concept here being, for me, what does it look like to teach and assess a class equitably during a pandemic? What does a fair class look like when some students might be able to function reasonably well, but another student is worried about food, bills, family members, and that brain space to study and focus has now been brought down to a 0. So how do we shift the way we teach and assess in a way that continues to hold students to high standards, to make measurable skills gains, to challenge and push them while remaining compassionate to those issues above? So those are some of the challenges that I'm dealing with, and that I think most of us are. So I'll get right into some strategies. I'm addressing this in a few different ways, and I'm happy to share more. One big thing is maintaining a sense of community. I want to still be able to work with them as a group, offering my own support and giving them a way to continue making that peer-to-peer connection. I'm checking in with them as a group on our classroom app at their regular class time, which they don't have to come to at that time if they can't. But I think knowing what part of the day is specifically blocked off to get support from me and talk to their friends can give some structure to this otherwise really chaotic time. And I'm making sure that it's more than just a text box. I'm trying to make sure they hear my voice, they see my face during this time. That goes a long way towards building and maintaining those strong relationships. One way I've specifically done this is creating instruction videos for students to watch, and I've done phone or video calls in place of what's normally a one-on-one conference with students. It's not just me though, I'm trying to give them as many opportunities to safely interact with each other's faces and voices. One example is to have students send a photo of their classroom or share something that made them smile during the weekend. When I've done this, it gives students a chance to see a funny photo or see a student's baby or parent in the background, and continue to feel connected to their classmates as friends and as peers. They can tease each other, they send flower emojis, they answer questions for each other, and they kind of maintain that sense of community, which helps a lot with the social isolation piece. Just being a little more concrete really quick, we also have a classroom app that I've kind of referenced, and we had some luck on our side. We implemented that early, which gave us a little bit of an edge. We're using the classroom app Ding Talk, which gives students a singular, straightforward, and relatively intuitive platform to continue large parts of our class. Students have to use a specific code to join their online classroom, which gives the admin, that's me, full control over who's accepted or rejected from the online classroom. My students have one large group chat where I can make general announcements, and within that, they're each divided into their classrooms if they would be in the building. They can send emails and write papers. They can message me or another classmate in a private chat and turn in digital assignments. There's an attendance feature which we can set to specific clock in and clock out times, which is helpful for accountability if you're trying to track when you're providing services and for how long. It's also similar to other messaging platforms students might use in their personal lives, like Facebook Messenger, in that it allows students to tag each other or for me to tag them in a question or response, and to use emojis, which is really helpful for some of our young students or our ESL learners to be a little more nuanced with what they're trying to express when they don't have the word or the sentiment. And I'll just finish with one example from today. I used this app for my class this morning. Before we started here, I sent out a link to a radio program about COVID and nursing homes. I teach a nursing assistant class, so that was relevant. I sent the link out in our app, and I asked them to listen to the program at any point today. and send back a few thoughts or questions they had. I'm able to respond in real time. I can see who's opened the link, and students can talk to each other about their thoughts or have questions, or again, just have that peer-to-peer connection.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm seeing questions come in the chat box. Kate is a high school teacher. So clarifying for those of you who are asking, and it is Ding Talk. Is that correct, Kate?
Yes, Ding Talk.
Okay.
As in dog.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. Now I'd like to get Nancy's perspective from the elementary education age on same questions. How are you supporting SEL? What are strategies that work for you?
I'm in. So as you said, I am a kindergarten through 5th grade math instructional coach. And so our primary goal is just to make sure that we help the kids transition to a new normal. And with that, we are partnering with our parents because they
Sorry, Nancy, I'm hearing that people can't hear you. So if you could speak just a touch louder. So sorry.
Okay. We are partnering with our parents, and this is something that we want to make sure that we keep in close contact with our parents. So we have a variety of methods. We use our Google Apps for Education. We have an online service that allows us to text and to phone parents and to do this in multiple languages. We also are in close connection with the local news stations to make sure the information goes out regarding like meals and any kind of support. Another item for elementary is that we have people that do not have connectivity. And so we have schools within our district where you can go to just the parking lot if you need to. If you have a device that is from the school, you can connect via the internet that way. Or we also have Wi-Fi hotspots. Just some of the ways that we are helping to support the families. For the classroom, we are doing asynchronous learning for the most part, but we do want to make sure that we are making those weekly connections, and that could be something as simple as sending out a form and saying, hey, check in, tell me how you're doing. It could also be a weekly meeting that we're having online. So those are just a few of the items that we do.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a very appreciative voice on how you're handling all of those strategies. So now I just want to mention, we are trying to deal with the mic issues and recognizing that that's happening, but we hope you all found that instructive. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box. We'll make sure that they end up in the right place. And now I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Rasberry.
Hi, everyone. We know that this is a really difficult time for districts as you're facing some immense challenges and scrambling to meet the needs of students and teachers in the face of this pandemic. Educators have to be faced with transitioning from typical classrooms into remote learning basically on a dime. And while we know those conditions are not ideal, we wanted to provide a framework upon which you could consider the changes necessary to make this transition. Next slide, please. In previous years, AIR worked with the U.S. Department of Education and its Office of Educational Technology to develop a toolkit for future-ready leadership, or in other words, how to lead systems change and integrating technology to broaden student learning. We began with a literature scan about best practices for EdTech and landed on these 4 focus areas as guiding principles for leaders as they shift into a tech-focused environment. Though this toolkit was developed prior to the COVID-19 crisis, the framework can easily be tailored to the current reality many districts are facing. The first part that I wanted to speak to you about is a collaborative leadership. The crisis necessitates now more than ever a commitment to strong collaborative leadership. As you figure out your next steps, consider your vision for remote learning and the immediate goals through the rest of the school year, for example, as well as how they connect to your pre-existing long-term goals for your district. Seek out voices from a variety of contexts, tapping into your parent and community stakeholders who are already on like your school councils or other advisory boards, to hear from them directly about the challenges they are facing, and perhaps even from the community, the resources they have available and could share with your district. The last two bullets are really key. We're hearing this from a lot of folks in the field, that collaboration to streamline messaging to students and parents. Right now it can be pretty overwhelming. Many of you on this may have experienced this yourself as parents, to be receiving messages from multiple sources and trying to keep up with all that students are being asked to do. And so considering ways to consolidate those, making things a bit easier to follow. One example that I wanted to highlight was that of Seattle Public Schools. They've established a web page where they house all of their district messaging and resources. They link back to previous weeks. For example, they give updates on a weekly basis, and they link back to those in case someone might have missed it. And while they're sent out via email, there's also that landing place where people can go back to that information as they find it helpful. So you could replicate that for your districts and even for individual schools. And lastly, I wanted just to point out to just keep in mind that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Right now, we are all trying to adjust to this new normal, all of us. And it can be difficult to parent, to homeschool, and to try to work remotely. And so just kind of keeping that in mind when you're looking at it and considering things holistically. Now, on this next focus area around personalized learning for students, when we think of this, it looks a bit different than it would if we were considering it in an in-person setting. Your goal should not be to replicate the school environment. Let me say that again. Your goal should not be to try to replicate the school environment. That is, do not think in terms of like 6 to 8 hour days of instruction at home. That's simply not possible right now. Perhaps not even possible in ideal conditions. But when you think about personalized learning, you must take into consideration, of course, that all students may not have access to devices. So plan both plugged and unplugged activities that don't require connectivity. UNC TV and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, for example, have partnered to share educational resources that align PBS programming with North Carolina state standards. So while this may still be considered plugged, it's open to all kids who have access to public television, which is, you know, a much broader group of kids than perhaps those who have internet access. If you are able to get online with students, consider, as Nancy talked about, scheduling virtual class meetings so you can see your students and help to build that community and give them a sense of normalcy with seeing their classmates and friends. And then whatever you plan, do keep in mind that students who have special needs will need similar accommodations at home, so try to kind of keep that in perspective. The next issue around robust infrastructure looks much, much different when we consider the issues related to remote learning. Equitable access to next generation bandwidth and solid secure wireless networks may be possible in schools, but it becomes a broader challenge when we're talking about kids at home. So we ask, when you're surveying your students about their access, be sure to keep their responses anonymous so they don't feel the sense of self-consciousness about what they have compared to their peers. Also think outside of the box to consider ways to get more kids connected. I think, again, this was an idea that Nancy considered was, you know, bringing the internet to them. The exemplar that I'm sharing here is in South Carolina. One district sent out buses loaded with Wi-Fi routers so that kids in low-income communities could get online. Others are loaning out devices if they are available, and just being able to give access to kids in that way. And then finally, when you're designing your learning plans, consider that some kids may have access to devices and may be able to get connected, but they have to share that access with siblings and perhaps their parents who are working from home. So be sure to kind of limit what's required in terms of synchronous online learning activities so that, you know, kids can kind of get it in when it's available and they can share across. And then finally, personalized learning for teachers. It is key during this time to think about our teachers. We know that this has been a major learning curve for everyone, but teachers included. Now is the time to connect with colleagues for support and collaborative development of learning plans. Don't try to do this in isolation. Work with your grade level peers, your subject area colleagues. Come together and develop these ideas for home. And then build out your virtual learning networks too. A lot of teachers use Twitter to personalize their learning. There are tons of ed chats available for subject areas across the grade span. If you are interested in 5th grade English language arts, there's probably a chat for you. Similar if you're working with middle school guidance. So really kind of tapping into and using social media as not just a way to be connected personally, but also professionally. Districts, of course, can also play a role in providing online professional development so that teachers are learning on the same tools that students are using. And educators, this truly is the time to stay connected and to lean into learning online as professionals. So we wish you the best of luck and hope that you will find these resources and tips and tools beneficial for the students that you're working with as well.
Thanks for that, Melissa. For those of you who joined the previous webinar, we focused on high-level e-learning strategies that are aligned with research on good teaching and learning, so the instructional side of this. Today we're going to build on that with some information that can help you start to think about policy and practice changes for the longer term, including where to turn for information you can trust as you continue to adapt and look for some sense of assurance. Like last time, I'll note that this list is not representative of everything available to everyone, and we continue to encourage you all to be conscientious about how you approach the selection process for e-learning. Also, the links I'm sharing will be available in the roundup we're providing. So first, we want to look at a few sources for state and district leaders. The Comprehensive Center network consists of 19 regional comprehensive centers and 1 national comprehensive center that provide resources and technical assistance services to all states and territories. In response to COVID-19, they've put together a list of what they're calling continuity resources, which are resources for a broad variety of impacted audiences in the system to help learning continue throughout the disruption of regular school operations. Similarly, the U.S. Department of Education is continuously updating their resource page for all things responding to COVID-19. This page includes content for people working in all levels of the education system, and leaders can look there for key guidance around federal programs as that guidance emerges. I want to point out EdWeek, the publication, is also providing thorough coverage of the situation. This is one example. It's their map of all the school closures across the country and up-to-date details on how different states are responding. So as teachers and caregivers continue to support students throughout the school closures and e-learning, you're dealing with the fact that in some states and districts, the situation is really open-ended right now. And frankly, it can be difficult to keep planning when you're not sure how long you need to plan for. In this situation, it's important to be able to trust sources of information, whether we're talking about resources to put into instruction, standards against which you can reflect on what you're doing, and guidance on how to proceed. The following are a few I regularly turn to as a starting point or a check against my plans. Learning Keeps Going is for everyone, but primarily teachers and caregivers. It's continually updated resource repository for anything you might need to get through the situation. And it's provided by some of the most prominent organizations working in ed tech right now, and has their backing. 2 of those organizations are the others listed on this slide, ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, and Digital Promise. Those are sources that you can look to right now if you're unsure about something or you need more guidance. During our last webinar, we heard from many of you that you needed resources and guidance for working with early learners, kids in early childhood programs and early elementary grades. I'd start by saying that one resource we shared earlier, Learning Keeps Going, allows you to sort the free ed tech resources by grade. So you can look for that specific grade band that you're interested in. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology provides some guidance on using technology with early learners, and this includes information on developmental appropriateness if you're concerned with screen time and other items for those young kids. The second resource here from the department also includes guidance on early learners with disabilities. The second 2 items are also in response to some questions we received last time, specifically resources for working with students with disabilities and English learners. Both include guidance and tools you can use as a starting point for instruction. Finally, we all face the challenge of trying to vet the tools and materials being incorporated right now. One way to do this is to start thinking about what research is available. Now, to be clear, I will say that right now, as you're scrambling to provide opportunities for kids, particularly if you're a teacher with your own kids at home or a caregiver trying to work full-time and teach, digging into research probably isn't something you're going to be able to prioritize. But one thing I'm hearing a lot is that when this is all over or we start to transition back, school probably isn't going to look the same as it has in the past. And you'll want to understand what evidence says about ed tech tools you're going to invest in to build that new normal. It's also true that the ed tech field moves and changes quickly, and not everything that reaches the field has some or any evidence backing up whether it works or not. The Jefferson Education Exchange is one organization trying to change that through its ed tech genome project, which is working with education leaders, educators, and researchers to ensure practitioner voice is reflected in how ed tech research is carried out and that it's useful for classroom decision making. The aforementioned Office of Educational Technology also has resources that can guide leaders here, as well as teachers, families, and students, including a tool called the Rapid Cycle Evaluation Coach that helps practitioners design and implement ed tech studies. Finally, if you're just getting started with research in this area, EdSurge, which is a prominent ed tech publication that's recently become part of ISTE, published an article earlier this year which provides guidance on how to start learning and engaging with ed tech research. So if you're at the starting point, that might be a place for you to check out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marshall and Melissa. We really appreciate it. If I can invite our practitioners, Jody and Nancy, to join me on screen. Okay. So we want to hear from both of you, generally what you're doing about moving all of your students at such a rapid pace into remote learning, what kind of challenges you face and what strategies you felt were really helpful or that you want to share. And Jody, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks Dominique, it's great to be here. I wished we'd had this webinar about a month ago. When we got the message from our governor that our schools were closing on March 16th, and he created, which we were grateful for, a 2-week planning period for schools to prepare to move into distance learning. With the spring break thrown in there, we have had 3 weeks to prepare this, and we began our new format just on Monday. During that time also, public life has been suspended and we are currently under orders to shelter in place. Now, gratefully, schools are considered providers of essential services, so we have some flexibility to move about, but it has been quite a 3 to 4 week period. Our school, I'm here with Kate, is called Guadalupe Alternative Programs, or GAP, and we are a state-approved alternative program and a contracted site of the St. Paul Public Schools here in Minnesota. We have 150 students, grades 9 through 12, ages 15 to 24. Our demographics are 75% immigrant refugees, so English language learners. 90% of our students are from ethnic and racial minority communities, and 95% qualify for free and reduced lunches. Our students graduate with a high school diploma and an industry recognized certificate in one of 3 career pathways, and we provide comprehensive supports in terms of social work, mental health, and transition coordination to education or full-time employment. So that's our population. We're known as being pretty gritty and nimble, which is a good thing, and we have, this is not our first time that we have done the process of ready, fire, aim, and I feel like we have fired, and now we are working with people like you all to aim what we're doing in the future. Our biggest challenges are similar to many other people's. One is the digital divide. The phrase "we are all in this together" is starting to bug me because I don't think we are all in this together. I realize the sentiment is we all need to pull together, but we are far apart from one another in terms of how this pandemic is landing on us. So, so the digital divide is a big challenge for us and for our students and families. They may have some technology, but it's not adequate, or they may have a phone, but they don't have enough data. And so that's something going forward. I think it's a real social justice issue that we need to embrace. Also, many of our students have home environments that are challenged to provide the kind of space and support necessary for learning. So here's what we're doing about some of that. We made a commitment early on that 100% of our students were going to remain engaged with us, and that's one of our big goals. The other thing is that 100% of our students would have access to learning materials. So to that end, every one of our teachers has prepared lessons that include a variety of formats and activities, including use of technology where possible, but not requiring that. And I like the phrase I've learned here this morning, plugged and unplugged. I'm going to take that forward. Our teachers are attempting to keep their regular class schedule, albeit in their own home, and so that they can let students know during these hours I'm accessible to you. You can reach me. You can reach me through phone or email or texting, and that again is about keeping those students engaged with us. Like many schools, we are providing a week's worth of breakfast and lunch. Students and families are assigned a pickup day Monday through Thursday where they can pick up their meals and their learning packet for the week, and staff deliver to students and families who cannot make it here for any reason. So again, 100% access. Teachers are also assigned to be here one day a week to help package meals and materials, to greet the students and families, although from a distance, and then to deliver meals if they need to. So to be clear, our goal is to keep students engaged. We have a fundamental belief at GAP that relationships are the key to change. And we use relationships to build community, and we are continuing to do that. So the lessons and activities that have gone home are an invitation for students to remain engaged with their teachers. And they're an opportunity for teachers to, one, assess learning, but even more importantly, to assess basic needs. And that, for us, is the bottom line. So in terms of strategies, real quick, our distance learning program just started 2 days ago. So I can't speak to what is most useful in regard to our learners, but I can share a couple of things that has been useful in terms of strategies in supporting our teachers and helping us to move forward as the adults in this picture. One, we are using Teams for internal staff planning and student case management. So any meeting that we were in before all this happened in the last month, you're still in that meeting, it's still taking place, and we're staying connected and together in that way and continuing that work moving on. In general, we're using best practices for remote work as we learn what that is. I'm clarifying new roles and responsibilities for people in this new work environment. One example, again, is that the expectation is that teachers be available to students during their regularly scheduled time if they need any assistance with anything. We have created an online book club and have 4 different books that people are reading, can choose to read for professional development and to continue to build our own cohesion. And then I have heard of virtual happy hours, but I've not been invited to any of them. And I think I have some staff on this webinar, so that needs to change. And then as teachers are keeping students engaged and motivated, I'm trying to do the same thing for teachers and staff. I wish you all the best as we navigate this storm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jody. That was fantastic. And it's inspirational what you guys are doing for your students. Nancy, I invite you to answer the same questions. What are those strategies? What are those challenges?
Dominic, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my video off in an effort to hopefully save bandwidth, so maybe you can hear me.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, wonderful. So remote learning, rather than seeing this as a challenge, we tried to and look at it with a different perspective so that we could see it as an opportunity for growth in a new direction. And I believe that our teachers have grown exponentially, and elementary teachers are just a very flexible and creative group. So every challenge is just simply an opportunity to learn something new, and that's how we've been trying to see it, trying to stay positive, because that's what we need to do. But due to the coronavirus affecting Asia and Europe, it seemed evident that the U.S. might be affected as well. So our school began to discuss contingencies plans should we have to go to an e-learning platform, although we didn't really know what that might look like. So the teachers and the academic coaches began formulating grade level plans early on in March, anticipating this. And we were looking at, first of all, the educational standards, because that's where we always want to focus, is looking at the standards first. What do our students need? And then go from there, because it's more about what our students need than what it looks like as far as is it plugged or unplugged. We want to make sure that we are attending to their academic needs. When we considered options, though, we did consider what it might look like as far as plugged versus unplugged, because we know that not all students have devices. Sometimes the device at home may be the parent's phone. And then that, of course, is going to work with them. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. When we're using remote learning, for our system, we focus primarily on the G Suite tools, which have been extremely helpful, and our technology groups have been in communication, making sure that we are also very aware of privacy and first and foremost, making sure that our kids are safe and that they are protected. We also have used Seesaw, but one thing that we have to think about is, as educators, we have to put our egos aside and to lean on each other. I think several people have already mentioned how we do team planning, and that has been very important in this as we move forward, because with planning, recording, posting, responding to teachers and students, participating in virtual meetings of all kinds, and of course, if you have children at home and you're teaching them, or if you're a caregiver, if you have preschoolers, all of that, it is quite possible for teachers to be on 24/7. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to make sure that we are reassuring that we are doing our very best in a unique situation. So it's important to also communicate this to parents. We want to make sure that they know you are doing your best in this situation. And with that in mind, we're supporting our parents. And I think Melissa said that so beautifully, in that school is not going to look the same. You will not have 7 hours of instruction. It's going to be greatly reduced, because in the classroom, you may have 20 students, and you're going to and from different locations throughout the day, and you're also attending to that. At home, it will look extremely different. But all that in mind, we just have to make sure that we are extending grace to each other as well as grace to ourselves.
Thank you so much for that, Nancy, and what a beautiful way to end it. Absolutely some fantastic points. I just want to mention very quickly, if you do have to leave, please make sure to take our survey. There's links in the chat box. And also, all of these resources and recording will be posted on the REL Midwest website, and you will be sent a link as participants in this webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to Fausto. I just want to say thank you one more time to our amazing educator panelists. I think you'd get a big round of applause right now if we were in a room together. All right, go ahead, Fausto.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, that was such an amazing amount of information and context to how we started the webinar. We're going to get into some quick tools that can help maybe think through how you're engaging your learner or who you might be engaging at the time. Big considerations over virtual learning tools. We know that there's a lot out there. Some of them are free, but we really want you to think at your levels and during your roles to think about what tools is your district and state already approving. Again, we'll go back to consistency. We go back to this idea of not working smart, not hard, making sure that we are tapping into people's already their experience. Again, maybe thinking about the primary components of the platform. What are you trying to do? What's the objective of this? And we're going to highlight a few different details in the platform, but at the end, these are just considerations for yourself to think about. Again, how does the resource itself map onto what you're trying to do with the curriculum? Again, how does it help, facilitation, sound constructs, group discussions, breakouts, and then also that individual recheck. Let's talk about a little bit of this idea of how it, again, eases the use of instruction for staff and students, right? It's everybody. So we go back to that first bullet and making sure that we are creating those feedback loops, as we mentioned, not only about how we're doing, but how we're working through these platforms. We're also looking, again, the cost obviously is always a consideration. There's a lot of free up to a limit. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to those details. We also want to make sure that as we're engaging our stakeholders, we're also paying attention to, again, cost of their data rates, right? So it's been one of the things that we want to think about in equity and make sure that we are not leveraging a platform that we assume is not costing anything, but might be costing the user something. Again, Wi-Fi access and ease of use. Again, in general, learning curve around the technology. Always a big thing because, again, we always want to tap that we are mandated reporters. Some folks have broader regulations to the type of conversations that you might be leveraging in this social emotional space. So you want to pay attention to compliance with HIPAA or FERPA. obviously different concepts around encryption and privacy, and organizationally to really think about, if you want to get in front of some young people, do you have consent to get in front of young people? How can you leverage that consent so you can keep these ongoing relationships? And then always those last two are huge. This idea around just capacity of the virtual meeting. How many people are you inviting, right? Is it going to be huge? Is it going to be intimate? And ideas of how are you storing this information just in case people can't be there. So really high-level overviews of some platforms that we know are tried and tested, some of them that you know you might have some existing experience with, but you're using them in completely different ways and just kind of watching, right? We're using them for happy hour, we're using them for instruction, we might be using them for processing and communities of practices. So we got YouTube, we know that one, we see that one all the time. It does allow for video sharing and whatnot. Google Classroom, young people are using that, it is free, it can help with alignment of what the school is using and what you might want to think about reinforcing those supports. Zoom is a hot topic. And then we have other ones like Facebook groups that some people are using. And if you are in a very structured level, you could think about Blackboard, which again has fees related to it. So we wanted to make sure to give you some key points, but always this idea that you want to make sure that you can sustain the practice by making sure you're looking at the details of the platform. Again, now for messaging, if you want to try to engage, some folks are using Class Dojo, there's always Facebook Messenger, there's Bloom, there's different ways of collecting and kids' work, so through their own projects, something like Kid Blog. Some folks, there's a free platform like WhatsApp, because we know that some communities have that. And then Remind, which is a great way of, again, thinking through those rituals and making sure we can help our young people stay on track, regardless of what you're engaging them, either their academic lessons or any of the related social, emotional development pieces that we're pushing them to engage in. And then if you are pushing more of a collaborative planning, because I know we have different roles, so all of us who want to really still roll up our virtual sleeves and get into the planning aspect. So then when we're going to be implementing any of our strategies, we obviously have GoToMeeting, which is again a fee-based, but it is very well structured. We have Adobe Connect, which is again a very tried and tested. It has a current free 90-day component if people want to maybe take a look at that. We also have Microsoft Teams, which is actually currently free to schools. We want to try to leverage all of those current and emerging assets that we know exist, because that is also a very well put together platform. And we also have Google Hangouts, just in case, again, we're leveraging what young people already are doing or what the school might be leveraging, and we want to make sure we are tapping into that to not confuse or complicate this transition any more than necessary.
Thank you so much for that, Fausto. I really appreciate it. I just want to acknowledge that we are recording all of the questions and suggestions for different topics that you're leaving in the chat box, so please continue to do that as we finish up. You will receive a link to the recording of this and all of the resources. You also have the links sheet that has all of the resources that Fausto and all of our other speakers just talked about. We will be giving certificates of participation if you email us at relmidwest@air.org. Next slide, please. And I want to give a big thank you for our fantastic presenters from American Institutes for Research and REL Midwest, and our amazing practitioners. You guys are an inspiration to us all. And just want to say, as you're leaving the chat room, please make sure that you leave feedback on our survey. It's really important to us in terms of developing further resources and also being able to continue to do things like this. We've shared a link in the chat box for the survey. It'll open up in a separate window as this webinar concludes. We also encourage you to follow us on Twitter and to subscribe to our REL Midwest newsletter. You can follow the link in the chat box as well. We'll give you updates for all of our future events and resources that are being developed. Thank you for joining us, and be well.